Hi, I'm Dr. Boz, and today we're on part 2 of our 3 parts of how do we take a body from burning fuel to burning fat. This is the second part of the series where we've taken you through phases 1 and 2. This video is going through phase 3. You emptied out most of that storage in your liver, and you have marched yourself into phase 3 of a keto-adapted body. You know exactly the moment that you're in phase 3. How? It is the moment you pee your first ketone. Yes, I mean pee a ketone. Ketones don't end up in your urine by accident. You must get your sugar low enough that your body starts tapping into those stored resources of fat. Yes, fat, fuel, turns into ketones. And the minute you make one, you're going to accidentally spill some into your urine. You know you're in stage 3 because you peed your first ketone. But the timeline is probably about 24 hours since that last high carbohydrate meal. If you're completely fasting, almost everyone's there by 24 hours, but most patients don't do that. They eat high fat to get to phase 3. The status of your body is that most of your body is fueled by glucose still, but now you have your first recruit, your liver. Your liver has started to produce ketones. Yes, that's where most of your ketones are made. The mitochondria inside your liver are unique. If you look back at the other videos, we've talked about mitochondria being your furnace. It's where fuels get burned within your cells. Most of you learned this in the 6th grade science, but it's been a while. So the 2 fuels you have an opportunity to use in the human body is fat or glucose. Most of us, especially if you've struggled with your weight, have used carbohydrates or glucose as your fuel forever. The key to transitioning to keto adaptation is that you will start producing ketones about 24 to 48 hours after that last high carb meal. Your brain fuel is still all glucose. No ketones for the brain yet. As we look at folks who have the biggest struggle at getting to phase 3, it is my patients with a stubborn liver. We talked a little bit about this in the last video. I know when I'm dealing with a stubborn liver by a lot of the histories that I get from patients. Here's some of the comments that I hear from patients who have been stuck with an overstuffed liver, a resistant or stubborn liver for years. They'll come in and say, "Doc, I have tried every diet under the sun and I just can't lose weight." They'll come in and say, "Doc, I'm a dude, but my stomach looks like I'm pregnant. Can you fix this?" They're also the patients who say, "Doc, I've had gastric bypass. I lost some weight, but it all came back." These are patients stuck with an overstuffed liver, usually insulin resistant, and they're the ones that are going to have to pay attention to phase 3 and phase 4. These patients are stuck with a biochemistry crisis. Yes, they can't lose weight, not because they're not good at following the rules or not good at limiting their calories. They've done that really well. What they weren't taught is how to shift the chemistry within their system. Their bodies are stuck, and the weight loss is trapped inside those fat cells, and that stubborn liver is helping to keep them overweight. In phase 3, we've arrived at a liver that is far depleted from what it was at the beginning of phase 1. In my insulin-resistant patients, that first ketone can be somewhere in that 2nd or 3rd day. And it's not that their livers are completely empty of all the carbohydrates they've ever stored. That could take a month of fasting. It could take 2 months of fasting to empty their liver completely. But what they've done is depleted the sugars enough that their body had to start making a different fuel because the sugars were unpredictable. They've lived in a high glucose chemistry for years. By shutting off the carbohydrates, we've lowered their sugars. This sent their liver into a panic, and now in phase 3, their liver is producing ketones. The key to entering phase 3 is to make sure you document when you make your first ketone. This is vitally important to understanding what's going on in your system. Most of my insulin-resistant patients have tried diet after diet. When I introduced them to using a ketogenic diet, I didn't do it very well at the initial parts of my consultation with a ketogenic diet. I wasn't adamant that they check their ketones. I just said it was a good idea. Since then, I've changed that policy. We have to have you document your ketones. And the key reason is I lose them to frustration. They've been promised weight loss time and time again by folks that didn't understand the chemistry of their specific problem. And indeed, I would make the remark that I don't understand the chemistry of their problem unless they help me. By using urine ketone strips, you can measure exactly when you make your first ketone, and that teaches me, as well as the patient, so much. Here's the play-by-play that I would recommend you do if you're looking at a ketogenic diet and you've struggled with weight loss in the past. Tonight at supper, eat your last high-carb meal. Make it a doozy or not, but tonight is your last high-carb meal. Go to bed and wake up the next morning to find yourself 10 hours into this process. That gets you through phase 2. In the morning, start the day with whatever drink you like, as long as there's no sugar substitutes and as long as there's no calories. So most people choose coffee or tea. Add some MCT oil. I love the C8, C10 stuff. Make sure you've got the right stuff going in there. Or just heavy whipping cream. Have as many eggs or bacon as you want. After work, meet your friends out to a restaurant where they serve buffalo wings. You know, the hot, spicy ones. And you want the bone in, fellas. You want the skin on those buffalo wings. Be sure when you're ordering, you don't order carbs to be poured on top of those buffalo wings. You have no honey mustard and no barbecue sauce. It's truly the buffalo sauce, the buffalo wing sauce. And that is really low in carbs and pretty spicy. Most of us want to dip it in a high-fat dressing to settle down that spice. And that's great for this diet. Use the blue cheese dressing to dip it in or the high-fat ranch dressing, but just make sure it's not the low-fat stuff because there's lots of carbs hidden in that. You can't have that beer that you usually have with those wings though. Way too many carbs. In fact, no alcohol at all. You can have some water, some soda water, you can have tea or even some coffee if you need to, but no soda pop, no sugar substitutes, and no alcohol. Then fill yourself until you are stuffed, until you are so full you can't eat anymore. I mean it. Eat as many buffalo wings as you can. And then resist the temptation. Go home. Don't have that sugary snack that you usually have at bedtime. No snitching by a little piece of chocolate. None of that. Head to bed. I've had patients report that their bedtime that night was 8 o'clock because they just simply didn't know what to do with themselves if they weren't going to eat. They were afraid to watch television because they usually snack when they do that. They didn't want to have any temptations and they wanted to succeed. So off to bed, just get to the next morning. I don't care how you do it, but do it without taking in alcohol and without taking in carbs. The next morning, I want you to get up and check your urine ketones. I'll contend that most patients have had their first ketone at that point. I don't care if that urine ketone strip just turns a tiny bit pink. Any pink wins. It means that those mitochondria inside your liver have started to produce ketones. And even my patients with an overstuffed liver have success at getting to phase 3 with this formula. Those urine ketone strips are the key to the next day as well. Take about 4 of them and put them in your pocket. Even if you don't use them that day, they're pretty cheap, easy enough to waste. But by putting them in your pocket every time you go to the bathroom that day, I want you to check to see if you're still making ketones. Urine ketone strips are easy and cheap. They are portable. You don't have to poke your finger to see if you're producing a ketone. The key is that you know, because if you know, you can tell your team, your medical team. That process of producing ketones is incredibly important, especially for my folks who are insulin resistant. When I first started on the ketogenic diet, I did it because my mom was in a crisis of cancer, and I knew this diet would be helpful to her. But what I didn't know is that I was going to struggle to produce the first ketone because I was insulin resistant, probably about 20 to 30 pounds overweight, just enough to throw my chemistry into a crisis and into the storage mode instead of the ketone making mode. That first month was incredibly frustrating to me. I didn't understand that there were carbohydrates in gum, in toothpaste, in cough drops. I screwed up by having barbecue sauce and having carbs hidden in that. The mayonnaise I was choosing had carbs in it. I went out for what I thought was a high-fat soup. boy, they must have had flour in it because I didn't peak ketones for another day. Those little slip-ups would have sent me into the give-up mode if I didn't understand what was causing me to go in and out of ketosis. These ketone strips are incredibly important for those folks who have stubborn livers. So keep those ketone strips in your pocket. For the first 2 weeks, I would make sure that happens. If you don't use them the first day, you will have to throw them away. They break down when exposed to air. So that's why you'll find them in these bottles that don't have any sunlight and they close really tight. Make it your morning ritual to check those ketones for the first couple of weeks. And then keep accountable. If you start eating something and you're not losing any more weight, be sure you're checking those urine ketones. Let's take a look at this chart, specifically honing in on phase 3. You'll remember that on phase 1 and phase 2, we dropped that sugar dramatically. We used up the sugar found in the circulation, and then we used up all that extra sugar stuffed into the liver. Not all the sugar stuffed in the liver, but a large majority anyway. Now in phase 3, your body still needs sugar. Where is it going to get it from? This is the unique part about a ketogenic diet. You'll notice that the system is still being very much fueled by glucose, and you'll see this dashed line in phase 3 ramp up. Remember, this study was done in patients that were strictly fasting. That means water and salt only, no calories. In phase 3, their body found glucose. Well, where did it find glucose? This is called gluconeogenesis, and gluconeogenesis means that you make glucose. The glucose was found in that liver storage, and they continue to empty that liver more and more and more. As you can see in the background, that dotted line that was sharply dropping in phase 2, in phase 3 has dropped even lower. The glucose that you're supplying your body with now comes from other places such as fats and proteins. I talk a lot about this in the autophagy lecture or the autophagy phase. Tune into that to better understand that fancy word. But this is where our system finds proteins that aren't being used and fats that are tucked away in fat cells and inside our liver. Almost all of your body is still being fueled strictly by glucose, with the exception of your liver. The liver is the first to adapt. Your liver also is home to the unique mitochondria that makes ketones as well as burns them. By the end of phase 3, there are 2 sections of your body that are using fuel of ketones pretty routinely. Those are your fat cells and your muscle cells. About half of those cells, if you took a biopsy, would have mitochondria that are using the ketones as their source of fuel. How many of your cells are using ketones? This depends on how well you limit the carbohydrates in a ketogenic diet. It also depends on how resistant your liver is. How stubborn is your liver? In many of my patients with insulin resistance, they will hit a plateau that doesn't lose weight. This is frustrating to them because they'll come in and say, "Hey doc, I'm still peeing a ketone. Why am I not losing weight?" And it has much to do with which percentage of their muscle cells and their fat cells have adapted to a ketogenic lifestyle. In many of those patients, we need to extend the time in between meals. That length of time in between meals increases the number of cells that use ketones. And this is the key to their bodies losing weight. This isn't anything we talk about in the first couple of weeks of their ketogenic diet. We get them into week 3 or 4 before I start to talk about the length of time between meals. It naturally comes up when the patient says something like, "You know, doc, I got up and ate breakfast, but I really wasn't hungry." This is my invitation to say, then don't eat. One of the hardest places to step in and change a habit is one that we do automatically. We don't even think that we eat just because it's the right time, instead of to listen to our body and say, are you truly hungry? And in the adaptation of a ketogenic diet, the sensation of fullness is usually foreign to patients at first. So by the 3rd week, we talk more about, do you really feel hunger? And could you stretch the time between meals in hopes to lower the sugar even further and stimulate more of those cells to turn on their mitochondria that burn ketones? This wraps up phase 3 of that transition to adaptation. Tune in for the third and final video on this process. If you'd like to learn more about this ketogenic diet, subscribe to our channel or take a look at the book that I wrote any way you can. Until next time, I'm signing off, Dr. Boz.